And it's not enough to just say, but I'm not racist. Just being not racist is passive. And in this fight for justice, we need folks who are active. We need folks who are engaged and who are willing to be in the struggle for liberation with us. And being actively anti-racist is about every day pushing yourself to be thinking about these things that for many of us, we might be thinking about for the first time in the last year or in the last few months, or in the last couple years, but there are those of us who have always had to think about it, whether or not because someone else, again, put up a sign that said we can't go here, we can't go there, or whether or not we looked up at our organizations and didn't see anybody who looks like us. We've never really had a choice whether or not we think about it. Not thinking about it could be the difference between life or death for many of us. And so what are you actively doing every day? And I think that's the difference from being just passively, I'm not racist, to actively anti-racist.
Today, we're continuing our Bike-Side Chat series with the 2021 Kittie Knox Award winner, Tamika Butler. This award recognizes champions of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the bicycling movement. The award goes to an individual or group that has led in making bicycling more inclusive and representative, and has worked to remove barriers to participation by underserved and underrepresented people in their community, state, or country. Tamika L. Butler is a national expert and speaker on issues related to the built environment, equity, anti-racism, diversity and inclusion, organizational behavior, and change management. As the principal and founder of Tamika L. Butler Consulting, she focuses on shining a light on inequality, inequity, and social justice. Most recently, she was the Director of Planning California and the Director of Equity and Inclusion at Tool Design. Previously, Tamika served as the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, a nonprofit organization that addresses social and racial equity and wellness by building parks and gardens in park-poor communities across greater Los Angeles. Tamika has a diverse background in law, community organizing, and nonprofit leadership. She was the executive director of the Los Angeles County Bicycle Coalition, where many of us became familiar with her leadership in refocusing their work of bicycling advocacy with equity, diversity, and inclusion at the core. She's been a leader who has shined a light in her writing, speaking, and actions on the critical need to be anti-racist in our work to build a bicycle-friendly communities and a bicycle-friendly America for everyone. In the summer of 2020, Tamika was a guest editor of Bicycling Magazine's issue focused on racism and cycling, which featured stories from 14 black cyclists, including her essay, Why We Must Talk About Race When We Talk About Bikes. I encourage everyone to read these and consider how we can all do better in our work for all people riding bikes. Please find a link to that in the description. The League was proud to recognize her great work with the award named in honor of another black cyclist devoted to inclusion, standing up for what is right, and bringing people together through bicycling, Kittie Knox. And now to that conversation with Tamika Butler. So thanks for joining me today, all of us today, and congrats again on your award. But most of all, thanks for the things that you've done and continue to do that the award is in recognition of. I wanted to just start, I think, a lot of us in the bicycling advocacy movement are familiar, maybe some of us aren't, are familiar and inspired with your work and your writing. I'm looking forward to digging into that a little bit more and hearing your story. But I think a lot of us, I know I don't know your biking story, like your background story, and like where you came from and how you got into biking, and I don't know how that led to your part of your journey.
Yeah. I mean, if we go really far back, I'm a military kid, so I grew up kind of all over. But the place I was between second grade and high school was Okinawa, Japan. And we lived on a military base. And, the school was on the base, everything was on the base. And for a lot of us kids, bikes were kind of our way to freedom. If we wanted to go off base and go out in town, as we called it, the easiest and fastest way to get there was on your bike. You were always comparing your bike to other people's bikes, who had the coolest bikes. There was this one particular Japanese bike store that we spent all of our time in. And I always wanted a bike from there, and my parents said we could never afford it. And so I think bikes have always been tied to the sense of freedom and exploration for me, and frankly, bringing together, right? Like that was how I immersed myself in Okinawan culture, being able to get on my bike and go explore. And though I didn't speak Japanese, I was lucky my best friend was half Okinawan, and so she spoke Japanese fluently. But even when she wasn't with us in the bike store, what language we spoke didn't really matter, right? Because we were there about bikes and having fun. And then I think, as I grew up, I probably rode bikes a little less. I actually skateboarded more than I rode bikes. I remember being in law school at Stanford, and everyone bikes around Stanford campus, and I was a skateboarder. And then I moved to LA. My wife, my now wife, was my girlfriend then. She was in LA. I was in the Bay Area, and I moved to LA, and I gained a bunch of weight. I was driving everywhere. My job was as a countywide. It was countywide, so I was constantly in my car. And I went to a doctor, and the doctor said, you're black, you're this age, like you fit all of the demographics, you're pre-diabetic, like you have to do something. And when I lived in the Bay, I walked everywhere, took transit everywhere, played on like 3 soccer teams. I was just much more active than when I got to LA. And I had a friend who I was telling this to, the same friend who introduced me to my wife. And she said, a few years ago I did AIDS life cycle. I've been thinking about doing it again. I need a training partner. You should buy a bike. And so she convinced me to buy a road bike. I wasn't sure about it. I hated every minute of training. She ended up not doing AIDS life cycle. I did it. I loved it. And I noticed when I came home, all of a sudden I was like, well, maybe I'll just take my bike to the store. Well, maybe I'll just, do this. And I was looking for reasons to be on my bike after hating it during training. And that same friend who introduced me to my wife, got me on a bike, was a member of the LA County Bicycle Coalition. And when they were hiring, she pushed me the job announcement, and I said, well, you haven't done me wrong yet. And that's kind of, as they say, I guess the rest is history. And now I'm a full-blown bike person, a transportation person. And in the fall, I'm starting a PhD at UCLA and planning with the focus on transportation. So I really, went all in.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. So, I mean, what a friend, huh? I mean,
Yeah,
these are like
she's
all these
she's great.
life-changing things. Oh my
She gets a
gosh.
lot of things in my death. A lot of things are
Oh,
willed to her. Yeah, she's great.
nice. And do you still skate?
Not as much. My wife bought me a skateboard for a gift, and especially now that we have 2 little kids, I think my son, who's about to turn 3 in July, he's interested in it, and so I could see myself trying to pick it
Oh
back
yeah,
up. But
it's gonna happen.
as we get older, we also break
Well,
more.
you do, you do. I mean, I just learned this. So my kids are, 10 and 12, and like the last couple of years, it's definitely been finding biking. I mean, since they were about 4 or 5, I mean, really just finding different places to bike, and like you're biking to the playground, then you're biking over to friends' parties, and then, but then the skateboarding thing happened, and now it's mountain biking and skateboarding. So it's like the cool things.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can still do it. I think you're all right. It's I refound the love, and definitely get some stairs at the park when I'm skating with my kids now.
I love it.
It's awesome. Yeah. So I mean, so LA County Bicycle Coalition. I mean, you did amazing work there. A lot of us, I think, most of the audience here is going to be individual bike advocates, people who, uh, run or work for, or volunteer at advocacy organizations. What was that like to go there? I mean, what did you feel like were your priorities when you walked in in that sort of experience? I don't know, of that freedom that you felt on a bike, and then taking it from maybe just a recreational thing to like an access thing. Like how did that color the strategy, the lens by which you looked at your priorities at the Bicycle Coalition?
Yeah, I mean, kind of as I guess is my habit, I go way back to answer questions.
Do it, yeah.
So I always thought about getting a PhD. My undergrad was in sociology and psychology, and so a lot of my friends graduated from college and went and got PhDs. I had 2 parents who hadn't gone and gotten bachelor's degrees, and they knew they wanted a better life for me and my sister than they had. And so they really, I got good grades, and they were like, you got to be a doctor or a lawyer. And so that's why I ended up at law school. And so, I graduate from law school. I'm a lawyer for a while. I leave law, and I start working at policy oriented nonprofits, public health. And then I went to a foundation where I ran the Boys and Men of Color work and the LGBT work and the education portfolio. And there was just this whiteness in the nonprofit foundation world of, we're doing such a good job helping people, but we're not really examining our own internal biases. And I think I was just exhausted of being a queer Black woman in that space. And so I thought, I've always wanted to get a PhD. I'm going to go get my PhD in organizational behavior. As a lawyer, I was an employment lawyer. And so I was really interested, and part of, seeing what was happening with the nonprofit industrial complex, I was really interested in the systems of organizations and how can we be better organizations for people who feel othered in their organizations. And so I went through this whole process. I went to workshops, I was working on my application. And when this friend Shayla sent me the job announcement, I was like, I don't know. Like, I looked at the website, but not just the LACBC website. Like, I looked at a lot of bike organization websites. It seems really white. This is what I'm trying to escape. And I had a friend who said, if you want to go into organizational behavior and potentially do like DEI consulting, that's going to be being in a lot of really white spaces. And this is a friend who lives in San Francisco, is a member of the Bike Coalition. And she's like, you have not seen really know-it-all, white people until you've seen a know-it-all bike bro. Like, if you can make it in the bike world, then this will be great training for your organizational behavior. So, why don't you apply to grad schools, work there for a year while you wait to see if you get in, but then you'll also have experience running an organization. And so I think my goal, and she ended by saying, and it's less stressful, right? You were a civil rights discrimination lawyer, you did DV, domestic violence law, you were doing all this like on the ground frontline organizing work in your nonprofit work. Like, this is something you love, riding your bike, and you get to like pass out bike lights and make people happy. It can't be that stressful. And so my goal was to kind of decompress, do what I love every day, and kind of get some experience running an organization. I did tell the board when I applied, I'm a gender queer Black woman, and that's how I see the world. And so some of that will come into, like, I'm a civil rights lawyer, like that's going to come into my work. And then I think when I started at the Bike Coalition, I think I get a lot of credit for doing equity related work. But I think for the staff that was there, for the board that was there, for the folks who know me, they knew I was coming in with this organizational mind. So my goals were, like so many of our bicycle advocacy groups, I don't think people, and by people I mean those who have money to fund our movement, I don't think they always understand how important our organizations are to our members. I think they think of biking as an extra or a leisure activity, and certainly that is part of our membership and that is part of who we serve. But when we're giving out bike lights to a rider who works the midnight shift, who might be otherwise pulled over on a pretext stop for not having a light, or when we help someone, in one of our, weekend bike repair workshops fix their only mode of transportation, that's a huge deal for their family. And so I think, learning all the ins and out of all we did and the diversity of our membership, my main goals were to stabilize our organization, to make sure we had funding, to make sure we had structure,
Yeah.
to make sure everybody got paid, and to make sure we were doing everything we could do to both serve our members as a service organization, but to also put ourselves on the map as an advocacy organization. LA is a car town, and to really push for biking and walking and active transportation, and figure out ways to help people who cared about climate change, are cared about people having good access to jobs and being able to get to jobs, have those people understand why our issues were important. You care about immigrants' rights issues, you should care about bikes. Care about racism and policing, you should care about bikes. Um, and so my main goal was kind of just to have that cross section, and again, to make payroll,
Sure.
and to make sure we could run our programs. And I think anybody who's been in management at a nonprofit totally gets that.
Yeah, well, no, absolutely. And I mean, we all saw that from the national level. I mean, those of us, we're in DC, we're from a distance, we're hearing about mostly through the bicycle friendly community program. We get applications in from cities, and you hear what's going on in advocacy, especially at the National Bike Summit, and try to recognize that and share the stories of things that are going on. But I know that we definitely saw when you started that there was a big change at the organization. That balance though between those two things, like you have, like, as a service organization, like what sort of challenges did you have in when you're serving a membership that might be, I don't know what the makeup was, but like predominantly white, middle to upper class, disposable income for memberships, all of that, plus serving your mission, which is, and really moving the lens and centering people people of color. I mean, Black people in particular, who are overrepresented in traffic fatalities, biking, walking. We know these things. How did you, I don't know, just things that helped bring the people who were not there along, and like challenge that you face, and how you move through those. And
Yeah, I mean, in the end, I ended up leaving, so who knows if I overcame the challenges, but I definitely have never left. Sorry. Uh,
that's life.
uh,
Right, right.
I definitely have never left the space, right? And so I think part of how I've overcome some of the challenges I face was just realizing that some of that resistance is because there is a need, right? And I think any of us who do this work realize, yes, there is a historical makeup of who's historically been in our rooms and in our conferences, but there is a change, and there is this firm group of 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 newer voices or older voices who are finally being listened to, some combination of the two. And also I think folks who have been around for a long time who are willing to say, I miss this. And I'm ready and I'm open, and how do we do this? And so I think for me it was tough, and I think this is something we always face, right? Like, some of our most low income members still might be willing to give their last dollar to help out the organization, and some of our most well off members who have the nicest bikes are like, well, I don't know if I want to give if you're talking about all that other stuff. And so I think, you know LeBron James had his shut up and dribble moment. I think as Black folks, we all have moments where people bring us into the space and they're really excited about us, but as soon as we can't relinquish the fact that we're Black, and so we want to talk about the things that are relevant to us and relevant to the people in communities, like the communities that we come from, all of a sudden it's like, just focus on bikes, right? And so I think there was a split in the organization, outside of the organization. By in the organization, I mean both board and membership, right? Like, in our community and outside of our community, like, are we focusing enough on bikes? And I think, the way we overcame it was, I think on staff, we were all really committed. And I think there were people who weren't as committed and they left. No hard feelings, but and I think for the folks who stayed, we understood, when Vision Zero was kicking off in LA, we understood that our coalition of Vision Zero advocates wasn't just going to be LA County Bicycle Coalition and Los Angeles Walks. Now, certainly we had been having conversations for a long time, but we brought in a public health organization. We brought in, Advancement Project, which focuses on racial justice. We brought in a youth organization, which just focuses on getting kids to college, because we want AARP, right? Like, we brought in all of these non-bike groups. And I think that's how we overcame it. I really feel like most of our membership saw our vision, was committed to our vision, was excited about it. And so that made it easy. We have great folks in LA. And I think for the folks who weren't as committed, I think we effectively built new coalitions in other places. And for a lot of those folks who questioned us years ago when we said, we have to talk about this E of enforcement. Those are the same folks now who are like, we have to talk about enforcement. And so I think sometimes when you're on the right side of justice, or when you're ahead of the curve, or when frankly you're just doing what needs to be done for the people who matter the most. Eventually people catch up, and we just weren't interested in waiting. We just made our own way.
Yeah, that's great. Um, I'll just say that, like, from my, perspective, here, I think doing any work that has to do with social justice or racial justice or mobility justice or just justice, I think, especially when you're talking about race, I think that, I say, oh, well, your membership was probably majority white. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be resistant to it. I think a lot of folks struggle with that by doing the right thing, you're not going to bring, I inspire people and bring people along, because I mean, there is a thread of justice in all of the work that we do in
Right.
here, you know what I mean, and sort of attaching to it. And I think you did. I'll just say, I've been inspired by what you've done and what you've said, and I think a lot of, I saw to say, I think a lot of groups in our movement have been going through, you know, equity trainings, have gone to workshops, have, for years, have had equity program managers, have been learning, and yet this year, since 2020, I mean, um, even with hearing people talk about the violence and oppression and that of enforcement, we've been hearing this for years, but I think it's been a really steep learning curve over the last year for folks to sort of make the connection between, um, oh, that's not, I think making it central to their work and seeing it as a lens through which you see all of your work, I think is I think there's been a learning curve over the last year. And your writing and the writing of many and conferences and stuff have really helped. But I think getting down and seeing a lot of organizations do the work, I think, you and others should be proud of, like, the work that you've inspired. I think, when you're this year, this word of anti-racism came in to, I think, the vocabulary for any of us on this journey, and I think, could you help advocates understand, what that means to you, like the difference between being like I think we hear this a lot, like a colorblind approach, or a seemingly or want to be colorblind
Right.
approach to doing, making safe, comfortable, accessible places to bike, versus, not being racist versus being anti-racist. Like, how do you see, like, how can you like, speaking to the, advocates about that,
Right.
like, how do you explain that and help them understand?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much you said there. I think
I know,
one,
sorry.
I think the first thing is what you said. I think, we first can't assume that just because certain people are part of a certain group, that they're going to be resistant. And I remember when I started at Tool, as a director of equity and inclusion, and part of my job was going to be to go to all 17 of our offices and do equity trainings. I remember some of my friends, some of my liberal West Coast friends were like, "You're going to do that in the Midwest and you know South Carolina and Florida in the South." And I miss all of my colleagues at Tool. I loved being able to grow and learn from someone as amazing and insightful as Jennifer Toole. And some of my favorite trainings, some of the deepest and richest trainings, were those trainings that happened in the Southeast and the Midwest, right? When we look at our national election, the South saved saved a lot when folks didn't think. And so I think we can't make assumptions about any particular type of person or group of people. With that being said, I think part of what allows me to also be successful is making the shift that I don't think us getting to justice, right? And I like your use of the term justice. It's not just about equity, it's about justice, it's about liberation. And I have made a decision as a queer Black woman that my liberation isn't dependent on white people. So I think part of what frees me to not make assumptions about whether or not people will be like, I'm just meeting everybody where they are. And if you're ready to go on this journey, great. And if you're not, that's okay, because my liberation doesn't depend on white people figuring it out. Going back to the election, like I think black people are undefeated, and so I have a lot of faith that we're gonna be a big part of who leads us to liberation, as well as a lot of other members of historically oppressed groups, indigenous people, folks with disabilities, queer folks. So I think there's that. I think you're right. There has been this progression in vocabulary. And, I hear what people are saying when they say, well, I'm colorblind and I don't even see skin color. I just treat everybody equally. What I always say to folks is like, fine, like I'm not going to get back and forth with you about whether or not that's true. It's not for me to dispute your truth. But even if you are colorblind and you don't see color in people, the rest of the world does. Okay. And so when I'm applying for, when I'm taking as a teenager, when I'm taking a standardized test, I'm checking a box. When I'm getting my driver's license, when I'm whatever I'm doing, right? So you may be colorblind, but the world isn't. The world is keeping track and taking note. And so if you want to be a participant in this world and in fighting for justice, then just saying you're colorblind isn't going to do it. Because the people in power who make the forms, who make the decisions, who make the structures in the institutions, they've already decided it's matter. As a Black person, I haven't decided that my race matters or means that I'm more dangerous or means that I'm less capable or less smart. I haven't decided my gender is determinative of whether or not I should be able to be a CEO of a Fortune, 500 company. Someone else has. And so it doesn't help me to ignore the fact that it may be more difficult for me because I am a Black woman who is also queer. And so, one, I tell people that, like, yeah, I appreciate the platitude, but the platitude isn't going to get us anywhere. And then, two, I think the reality is it's not, I want you to see me for who I am. I want you to see me as a full person. So you may be thinking you're helping me by saying you're colorblind, but I'm not. I'm Black. And I want you to see that because that is part of what makes me who I am and makes me such a rich person. And it's not enough to just say, but I'm not racist. Just being not racist is passive. And in this fight for justice, we need folks who are active. We need folks who are engaged and who are willing to be in the struggle for liberation with us. And so the activeness requires that you actively be anti-racist, not just passively not racist. And being actively anti-racist is about every day pushing yourself to be thinking about these things that for many of us, we might be thinking about for the first time in the last year or in the last few months or in the last couple years. But there are those of us who have always had to think about it, whether or not because someone else, again, put up a sign that said, we can't go here, we can't go there, or whether or not we looked up at our organizations and didn't see anybody who looks like us. We've never really had a choice whether or not we think about it. Not thinking about it could be the difference between life or death for many of us. And so, what are you actively doing every day? And I think that's the difference from being just passively, I'm not racist, to actively anti racist.
That's great. So thinking about uh, y- another advocate out there who's hearing you talk, just giving advice on, I don't know, maybe it's even to the next Kittie Knox Award winner, the one a few years from now that's just doing amazing work. Um, what are the, what are the key actions do you think that they can take as a bike? Let's just say bike as a biking advocate, right now, like three things that they can do. Um, if you're speaking to them, like how do they help move the wheel forward, if you will?
Yeah, I get asked this a lot, and I say a few things. One, it's important to know you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. And so, this is a long fight towards liberation, towards justice, and we need you. We need you to be a part of it for the long term. On a training I was on last week with the EPA and DOT and HUD that I was leading, somebody on the organizing committee said, being a martyr is something you can only do once. So don't, like it's a gift that can only be given once. And so this idea that you don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm, I think once I had that realization that because I am vocal and because I am that person who's like, I have to speak up if something's wrong, there are a lot of people who know the right thing to do, but rather than doing it, they would give me a nudge and say, hey, Tamika, you should say something, right? And that, and many times I would have said something without the nudge, but other times I was setting myself on fire to keep other people warm, and that's not necessary because we need you for the long haul. Number two is invest in therapy. And I think that's a tip for everyone. I think we have not yet seen the depths of what the last year of physical distance and isolation and all of these things have caused us. And even before that, it was beautiful to be Black, but I was also persecuted for it. And so I think for advocates and advocates who really give everything to their job, how are you replenishing yourself and how are you taking care of yourself? And I think we have to stop having therapy and mental health being a taboo. And so I think that's another one. And then the last thing I would say is finding the NAP ministry on social media has been huge for me. And it's a Black woman who's just like, rest is revolutionary, right? And so I think the last thing I say is take a nap. I think that one of the things I used to tell my staff all the time, there's no such thing as a bike emergency. And not because, again, if one of our low income members, bike was broken and that's their only mode of transportation, sure, that's an emergency. But often for those of us in the advocacy space, like in our offices or with the privilege to be able to Zoom, um that we have to take care of ourselves. And so I think naps are underrated. It helps my kids, it helps me. And I think you got to take a nap. And you asked for three, but I would say the fourth is stay true to who you are. And I said this a little bit earlier. When you're sometimes you're feeling alone, and like no one understands you because you're out ahead. And so it seems like you're lonely and it seems like everybody's pushing you away, but it's just because you're so far ahead. And so stay true to yourself. And I think people will catch up or they won't, but you'll be happier.
Wow, that's good. And I'll admit to napping. I I do
So
nap.
good.
I do nap from time to time. Um, uh, so just a couple more things. So you're going into a planning PhD, right? So and you know how important like getting planning right is. I mean, you were at one of the best firms in the country in this space, tool, and learned from some of the best, got to work with some of the best, taught probably a lot of the best, and improved their work. Um, what when we're talking about, let's use LA as an example, or
Hmm.
or actually somewhere in Nebraska. Let's use somewhere in Nebraska, right? Right. Um, what do you tell, uh, if you're the mayor and you tell that the head of planning, do this thing to make sure we're planning right? Like what are a few of those things that we should be, I think, hoping to build the power to get the mayor to say, or the council to say this to planners? Like what should, how do you do planning right? Or I know it's a big question, but some
Right.
sort of,
Yeah.
essential elements of that to make sure I say this because, a lot of the pushback, I think some bike advocates hear, and they're not really, maybe, they hear is that, oh, well, we shouldn't, we shouldn't go ahead with that plan, or like, or it's, oh, we can only, we can, I think there's a scarcity narrative, basically. It's
Right.
like, oh, we can't do this here if, then we're never going to get these other things, and I know that we're on paving schedules and all these other things dictate, the network development. But I just want to know, like, what is the planning, directive that you give the head of planning?
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is I'm getting my PhD and I'm so excited about it. And I'm really excited to be under the tutelage of some of the best and brightest minds in all of planning, but specifically transportation at UCLA. But it's something I'm doing for me, not something I'm doing because I think I need the credential, or because um, I think it's the only way to become a better planner, right? It's something I'm selfishly doing, denying myself and my family income because I'm interested and I want to research and write and frankly like teach this next generation of planners. So I'll start by that, which ties into what I would say if I was mayor of my hometown in Nebraska. And I think it's something that Jennifer Toole did with me. I think one of the reasons there are so many greats at Tool is because it's a lot of people who didn't follow a mold. And when I decided I wanted to go to a private consulting firm, I applied to a lot of firms. And it's not like I got offers at every firm. And one of the main reasons I heard is, well, you're just not a planner. You you didn't go to planning school. And so, based on some of the other experiences you have, you would need to be paid up here, but you're really just down here on like planner level skills. And and I remember having breakfast with Jennifer Toole in downtown LA, and she's like, "You're a planner, right? Because you care and you can listen to people and you want to make things better for people." And so I think she was just such a role model as a supervisor, as someone who, if I was a mayor, I would say to the director of planning, you need to go out and listen to people. And we need to start expanding our definition of what an expert is. I always say that if you want to know about, what's happening on a street, the teenagers hanging out on the corner and hanging out with their friends, the grandmother sitting on her porch or peeking out the window, she can tell you about the speed. She can tell you about where people are getting hit. She can tell you about who's biking and who's not biking. She can tell you if there's a place to lock up bikes. She can tell you where the cars and the bikes are having a ton of conflict, right? And so we need to expand our definition of who is worthy to listen to, who has the privilege to have the director of planning's ear, and who doesn't. And so what my directive would be, I think a first step to being a great planner is, who are we doing this for, and how do we listen to them, instead of always going out and saying we know what's best because we have our engineering degrees and our planning degrees. And then, as we know, sometimes we make improvements and no one uses them, and then we go back and it's like, oh, that's not really what we wanted. And then other times people aren't using them because they don't know if it's for them, or because we haven't given them the other tools they need. But none of that can be figured out if you're not listening to people. And so we have to really expand that definition of who's a worthy planner, who's a worthy person to be listened to. And I think that's a lesson I'll forever take from Jennifer Toole, right? She took a chance on me. And so I always want to be willing to take a chance on others. And frankly, to be confident enough and smart enough to realize that it's not really taking a chance. Those are the folks who know what's going on.
Yeah. No, that's really really interesting, and yeah, so true. Yeah, so I mean, this award that you've been given is the Kittie Knox Award. Any final thoughts out there for others who are fighting to make sure that equity and diversity inclusion are part of the bicycling movement? Any final parting thoughts on how we can do better and carry on her legacy?
Yeah. I mean, first, I just want to say thank you to the league and whoever nominated me. I now have a other side. I now have a new,
Yeah, there it is.
I now have a new award, which is also a piece of art that we get to display. Um, and and I think, as you know, it was tough for me. Do I accept an award from an organization that I know hasn't always had a history of being inclusive of folks like me, or folks that I really admire and look up to? And when I think of someone like Adonia, I'm glad she worked at the league and did what she did, because I will never forget my first bicycle summit, when I had coffee with her and talked to her and heard about why she thought this work was so important, and read her book about, why the bicycle is so important. And so I think for me, all that is to say is that this work is long, it is complicated. We have to have grace for the folks who will make mistakes, but keep going, because you never know when you're the part of that transformative conversation for someone. When just seeing you at the bike summit was helpful, or just having that conversation, or just seeing something, you tweet it. There's a community, and I have always said this: the best job I've ever had was at the LA County Bicycle Coalition. I think so often, because of the nature of my work, I'm a consultant and I focus on transportation and equity. My job is to tell you what's not going well and what could be better. But I would be remiss to not say the best job I've ever had is at the Bicycle Coalition. I had the best coworkers, the best membership, and so many of my best friends are folks I met in the bicycle world. So yeah, there's nothing like a know-it-all bike bro, but most of us, as we know in this space, are just people who love to ride our bikes and find some common ground. And so I would say don't give up. Don't think, I should find another industry or another space. We need you here. And as much as, I have been to many conferences, and there's nothing like a bike conference. There's nothing like us. We're fun, we're chill, and we get to ride our bike all the time. And so stick with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh my gosh, yeah, couldn't agree with you more. Yes, please stick with it, everyone. And also, Tamika, thanks for yeah, not going too far away, and thanks for sticking with the bike movement. And again, we're excited to see your leadership as you move forward, and very proud to be riding with you, and trying to do better to make uh, a truly bicycle friendly America for everyone, capital E everyone. So thanks.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks everyone. It's a real honor. I really appreciate the work.